The Lost Colony of Roanoke isn't a mystery, it's a murder. And we know who's responsible. In the late 16th century, England was a nation straining against its ambition. Queen Elizabeth I ruled a small island kingdom overshadowed by the power of Catholic Spain. The Spanish Empire, fueled by gold from the Americas, dominated the globe. Its galleons controlled the seas, and its armies were the most feared in Europe. For England to challenge Spain was to challenge the world order. Sir Walter Raleigh, a courtier and soldier, championed this challenge. He argued that England's future was across the Atlantic. A permanent North American colony would provide a base for ships to raid Spanish treasure fleets. It would supply new resources and announce England's arrival as a world power. In 1584, Raleigh dispatched two explorers, Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, to scout the North American coast. They landed on the outer banks of modern-day North Carolina. The land they found was, in their telling, a paradise. Barlow's reports to London painted a picture of lush forests, abundant wildlife, and welcoming natives. He described the local Algonquian people as gentle and faithful. This portrayal was what Raleigh needed to secure the Queen's blessing and financial backing. To further captivate the English court, Amadas and Barlow brought two Native Americans back with them, Manteo and Wanchese. These two men would witness the heart of the English Empire. One would return to his homeland as a friend, the other would return as an enemy. In London, they were sensations. Queen Elizabeth, delighted, knighted Raleigh and named the new land Virginia in her honor. The stage was set. England's first attempt to plant a nation in the Americas was about to begin. The first colonial expedition, a group of 100 soldiers, miners, and scientists, set sail the following year. They were a military and commercial garrison, not families. Their mission was to establish a fort, search for precious metals, and solidify England's claim. Manteo and Wanchese accompanied them, returning as interpreters. The man chosen to govern this enterprise was Captain Ralph Lane. His previous command was in Ireland, where England was engaged in a campaign of suppression. The tactics he learned there were effective for subduing a population. The question was how he would apply those tactics to a people he was supposed to befriend. The colony was troubled from the start. They arrived too late in the season to plant crops, making them dependent on the local tribes for food. Their supplies were low, and the promise of riches failed to materialize. The colonists were isolated, ill-prepared, and thousands of miles from home. Their survival depended on the goodwill of the Algonquian peoples, a network of tribes with their own alliances and rivalries. The English failed to grasp the delicate balance of power in the region. The return of Manteo and Wanchese highlighted a growing cultural divide. Manteo became a crucial ally, facilitating trade with his people, the Croatoans. Wanchese grew hostile during his time in England. He viewed the English as invaders. He learned to distrust their intentions. When he returned to his people, the Roanokes, he warned them that the English could not be trusted. Lane did little to foster trust. He saw the local tribes as potential threats or resources to be exploited. When food became scarce, he used intimidation. His men pillaged native villages, taking what they needed by force. These actions transformed wary neighbors into resentful enemies. The leader of the Secotan tribe, one of the most powerful in the area, was a chief named Wingina. Initially, Wingina had been friendly, seeing the English as potential allies. But as Lane's demands grew aggressive and his men's actions violent, Wingina's position changed. He began to see the English as a drain on his people's resources and a threat to their sovereignty. Lane, isolated in his fort, became consumed by paranoia. He was a soldier in a foreign land, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Rival tribes, eager to see the English turn against the powerful Secotans, fed Lane a stream of disinformation. They told him that Wingina was plotting to annihilate the colony. They warned of a massive, coordinated attack. These whispers found fertile ground in Lane's suspicious mind. He saw conspiracies everywhere. He failed to see that his own actions were the true cause of the growing hostility. He was trapped in a feedback loop. His aggression bred native resentment, which he then interpreted as confirmation of their treachery. The situation grew desperate. The English were starving. Their relationships with nearly all surrounding tribes had deteriorated. Lane became convinced that a single, decisive action was needed to secure the colony's survival. He believed he had to eliminate the source of the threat. In his mind, that source was Wingina. He decided a preemptive strike was a necessity. The confrontation was an execution. On June 1st, 1586, Lane and his men went to Wingina's village, pretending to seek a parley. They arrived armed. According to Lane's own account, the plan was precise. He would give a signal, the phrase, "Christ our victory." When Lane uttered those words, the English opened fire. Wingina was shot but not killed. He escaped into the surrounding woods, wounded. One of Lane's men, Edward Nugent, pursued the wounded chief. He caught him and decapitated him with his sword. Nugent returned to the English camp with the severed head of the Secotan chief. This act of brutality was more than the murder of a leader. In Algonquian culture, the desecration of a body, especially a chief's, was an unforgivable offense. It was a declaration of total war. It erased any possibility of peace or coexistence. Lane believed his strike had saved the colony. In reality, he had just signed its death warrant. The news of Wingina's murder spread through the coastal tribes. The English were now viewed as savage killers. All alliances dissolved. The few remaining friendly tribes distanced themselves. The English were completely alone, surrounded by enemies. Just over a week later, a fleet of ships appeared. It was Sir Francis Drake, returning from a raiding expedition. He offered to take Lane and his men back to England. For Lane, who now understood his situation, the offer was a deliverance. They abandoned the settlement. England's first attempt at a colony had ended in failure, leaving a legacy of bloodshed and mistrust. Raleigh was undeterred. The failure of the military garrison convinced him a different approach was needed. The next expedition would be families, men, women, and children, sent to build a permanent settlement. This was to be the city of Raleigh. In 1587, a group of 115 colonists, led by the artist John White, set sail for the Chesapeake Bay. White was a different kind of leader than Lane. He had spent time on earlier voyages, documenting the New World through his watercolors. He had a deeper appreciation for the native culture. The pilot of the fleet, Simon Fernandez, was more interested in hunting for Spanish ships than transporting colonists. Against White's protests, Fernandez forced the settlers ashore on Roanoke Island. The colonists arrived to an ominous scene. The fort left by Lane was overgrown. They found the bones of one of the 15 men from a small holding force left after Lane's departure. They soon learned the rest had been killed by the local tribes. They were in the wrong place, a place stained by the violence of their predecessors. Fernandez left them no choice. They set about repairing the fort. Among them was White's pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. On August 18, 1587, she gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Their supplies were insufficient. They had arrived too late to plant. They needed to re-establish contact with the local tribes. But the memory of Ralph Lane and the murder of Wingina remained. Manteo, who returned with this group, managed to broker a fragile peace with his Croatoan people. The Secotans and others remained hostile. It became clear that someone had to return to England for supplies. The colonists persuaded John White to go. He was reluctant to leave his family, but understood the necessity. Before he departed, they agreed on a simple but crucial signal. If the colonists had to move, they would carve their destination into a post. He gave one final instruction. If they left under duress, they were to add a Maltese cross above the name. The presence or absence of that cross would mean the difference between an orderly relocation and a desperate flight. White left for England in late August 1587. It was the last time he would see his family. His return was delayed. King Philip II of Spain had launched his armada to invade England. Every available English ship was conscripted for defense. White was trapped, unable to secure passage back to his colony. It took him 3 years. When he finally returned on August 18, 1590, his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, he found the settlement at Roanoke deserted. The houses had been dismantled. The area was enclosed by a defensive palisade. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, no graves. Carved into one of the palisade posts was a single word, Croatoan. On a nearby tree, he found the letter CRO. There was no Maltese cross. Croatoan was the name of Manteo's island to the south. It suggested the colonists had moved as planned to a place with allies. White was desperate to investigate, but a brewing storm and a resistant crew forced his ship to abandon the search. He would never get another chance to look for his family and his colony. For over 400 years, the fate of the Roanoke colonists has been labeled a mystery. The clues were there from the beginning. The disappearance of the 115 men, women, and children was the final act in a tragedy set in motion years earlier. The colonists were abandoned in a land that had been made hostile to them. They were left to face the consequences of Ralph Lane's paranoia and brutality. When John White sailed away, he left his people in an impossible situation. They were an isolated community, surrounded by native tribes who had every reason to seek revenge for the murder of their chief. The word Croatoan was a message of last resort. It was the only logical destination for a people in desperate need of sanctuary. They fled to the one place where they might find a friendly reception, to the home of their only ally, Manteo. What happened to them after that is a matter of historical debate. Some were likely killed by hostile mainland tribes. Others may have assimilated into the Croatian people, their English identities fading over generations. Archaeological evidence and DNA studies continue to offer hints of their survival. The primary cause of their disappearance is not in doubt. The colony was destroyed by a failure of leadership. One English captain, a soldier who saw enemies in every shadow, chose violence over diplomacy. Ralph Lane's decision to murder Wingina was a single act that echoed through the years, ultimately consuming the 115 souls who followed him. The empty fort John White found was a tombstone, carved by the hand of his predecessor.